Welcome to Earth, a Love Story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. This is a mini solo episode to explore some ideas that are present for me in the wake of a mini solitary retreat. Our next guest on the podcast will be Samantha Brooks, returning to share her humor and wisdom and vulnerability. Hopefully that will be out in a week or so. September is, as ever, an extraordinarily busy month for me, so I will get episodes out as I have capacity. I know you'll all grant me some grace. Speaking of September, it historically has been a very important month in my life, particularly around the end of the month, most particularly September 24th. That's the date of my parents' wedding anniversary, the date of my separation from my ex-husband all those years ago, the date I left the yurt and moved to New Mexico to roam through those dark hallways and through my own dark corners. In 2021, it was the day that the debrief article written by Ralph Blumenthal that featured me and a few other experiencers was released. My official experiencer coming out day. This year, on that day, I will be departing for a 3-week road trip to visit beloved teachers and friends and engage in an edgy and delicious spiritual retreat that is already stretching my comfort zone and rearranging me from the inside. And speaking of that, of edgy and delicious, that's what I want to talk about today. I've just returned from this mini solo retreat where I kept a, for me, rigorous schedule of meditation and yoga and digital detox and inner exploration in search of realizations. I am always with this work, always exploring and testing edges and searching for the world behind the world. So this is not unfamiliar territory. If you've listened to my book, you may remember the last time I undertook a solo venture to face something, integrate something, discover something, put myself on purpose beyond my comfort and safety and wait for something to happen. That was almost exactly 2 years ago, it turns out, September 14th of 2021, and my relationship was crumbling, and I was absolutely terrified to face what that would mean for my life. Another failure, another loss, another time I would be required to gather all of my remaining strength and resources and pick up the pieces and recreate myself once again. I was fighting the reality of the coming dissolution of the life that Jupiter and I had built together. And honestly, I was too exhausted, too wrung out from a lifetime of running and burning it all down and starting all over again, that I couldn't muster the will to get out before it all obliterated me. That's what I thought I would be doing when I drove out to western Colorado to camp near several bands of wild horses in, I swear, you can't make this shit up, Disappointment Valley, right next to Paradox Valley. I thought I'd muster the will and dust myself off and find my spine and go home and get out before it caught up to me. The grief. Somewhere in me I knew that this one would kill me. This gateway of grief would be too much. So I went to the high desert to be with horses and get ahead of it. Plus, it was so fucking on the nose, the names of those 2 valleys, and I'm a sucker for wild horses. So I drove through stunning red rock landscapes and got lost a few times, but eventually found the valleys and pulled in right at the golden hour. I drove around a bit looking for a good place to camp, and as night was falling, I was making offerings and drumming and asking the spirits of the place not to fuck me up, because I was trying to do something good and important. And after all, I was already fucked up enough. I made it through the night, my drum over me like a shield while I slept. I had serial dreams of serial killers, and woke up and dutifully wrote them down and then walked and walked, seeing little bands of wild horses in the distance, and looking at their tracks and following their paths and finally making my way back to the truck. I sat there in a little folding chair, sat in the silence and stillness and watched the shadows lengthen and lengthen, and pretty soon they were filled with that deep grief that I knew would kill me, and I couldn't bear it, so I packed up and drove away, and drove until after midnight and finally found a place to camp in a campsite right next to the highway with a bunch of RVs and trucks and people and cars passing on the road. And even though I'm usually much more afraid of people than of being alone in nature, this time I wasn't. For the first time in my life, I needed them around me, sleeping in the dark. They didn't have to do anything or even know I was there. I just couldn't be by myself anymore. I couldn't do what I'd done before. I couldn't burn it down, leave in the night, get out in the nick of time. After I made it home the next day, I went to bed and stayed there, letting the grief begin to take me. I was terrified that if I let myself cry, I would never stop. And I didn't stop for a long, long time. But I stayed and attended the funeral of that life and that relationship, and I let it kill me, and I died and didn't die. So, present day, this weekend, and the mini retreat I've just emerged from, what did I learn? I learned the same thing I learned then, that I'm tired of being alone, that I've gone down and in and mined the depths for the elixir, that I've spent most of my life facing the hard things and breaking open reality and splitting my world and life apart to save myself and try again. I want to say clearly here that I will always return to the underworld of myself when she calls. I will always tend to the uncried cries. I will always go down and in and engage with the shadow parts, with the mystical edges. I will always open myself to the liminal space of the mystery. I'm comfortable down there. I will travel down and let something die that needs to die, and let that turn to compost to nourish my next iteration of life, or relationship, or mission, or whatever is calling to be transformed. However, I think that this weekend I reached a deeper realization about moving from the paradigm of evolution through suffering to the paradigm of evolution through joy and creativity. I have come to something I never expected. I have come to the end of my deep dive, mud and blood healing journey. It's time to rise now. It's time to go. And I know I'm cringing as I'm saying this, but what the fuck, embrace the cringe. It's time to go from human doing to human being. This mini retreat activated my nervous system and exhausted me. And the beings have been asking me to figure out the joy thing for the last year or two, and I think they're serious because the biggest realization I had was that it's time for another path, another way forward, another way of being. Evolution through suffering? Nope. Evolution through joy and creativity. So, here are my tips for when you're ready to leave the underworld, which I wrote in February of last year and finally makes perfect sense to me. I always metabolize things slowly. Remember when you started the journey. Remember how it felt, the call. Remember that thing that started it all. You said yes because you tried every door. You'd flung yourself down on every floor waiting for someone to come along and rescue you. But no. You tried booze and smokes and beds. Just go listen to Miranda Lambert's song Vice. Sums it up nice. Or maybe you went the other way. Maybe you went all the way to the top. Climbed the ladder all the way up until you could see as high as the false gods and realized they didn't have any answers. What then? Maybe you went to the gym and ran till your feet bled. How did your old pair of sneakers turn into the red shoes you can never remove? Maybe you starved yourself, sacrificed your life on the altar of being a wife or a mother or a career woman. Empty, help me, what are we all doing? But you kept climbing and pushing and finally made it. Up there breathing the rarefied air with the hollow gods, and you looked down and saw, shit, they didn't have the answer after all. They were part of the game too, just like you. So eventually you answered the call in your own hollow belly, went down and in, Inanna and her descent, removing veils one by one until she reached the end. You walked into the door of your own anguish, and Ereshkigal, down there, holding it all, slaughtered you where you stood and hung you dead on a meat hook on the wall. But then, maybe you got comfy down there in the dark. Maybe you started to see how beautiful it is to have it all stripped away. Maybe you learned to cry, learned the wisdom within your own bones, and then maybe you died and realized that death was just a letting go. So you did. You let it all go. Maybe you learned to respect the wisdom of your own pain, the wisdom of the unheard, rejected parts of your own tender heart, and maybe that became your new best friend. Maybe now you're leaning against the wall, drinking a spicy sweet tea with Ereshkigal, laughing like sisters, bonded down there in the dark, knowing there will come a time when you must rise and return to the world with what you've learned. You know you'll be back. You know you can listen now to your own deep in the belly self. In fact, you find yourself pregnant with it all. You find yourself full, soft, luscious, juicy, and now you're getting a new call to return to the world, return to the up above and tell others what you've learned. So you begin the journey back, but find that none of the old rules apply. The booze and the running and the pushing and climbing for climbing's sake simply do not fly. You find that the machine is still all too happy to pull you back in, grind you back up, spit you back out. The world hasn't changed yet, but you have. How to come back to the world once you've been in the underneath? How can you invite the new little seed of you to sprout? Here are my tips for emerging from the underworld in no particular order. There aren't many. I'm still learning how to do it for myself, but so far they are plenty. Number 1, get yourself a playlist that feels like joy and helps you dance in the morning. Number 2, find friends who are not afraid of their suffering or yours. Number 3, sleep as much as you want. Number 4, orient your pace to the pace of life herself. Number 5, learn to move the miracle of your body in ways that feel nourishing instead of punishing. And number 6, keep having tea with Ereshkigal whenever she calls. Thank you to Morgan Jenks for our musical soundscapes, and thank you so much to the patrons who support this podcast. If you would like to become a patron, visit patreon.com/Robin Lassiter. And to book a one-on-one session with me, please visit honeyheart.org.